Hey everyone, thanks for joining us to dive into real, unfiltered stories. Today we're exploring voices that refuse to be forgotten. Let's get started. Drop your thoughts below. She asked for a blanket. What she got was a pair of arms wrapped around her in the dark. No one asked if she consented. No one asked if she could say no. This isn't just a story about two women sharing a bunk behind bars. It's about how intimacy becomes currency, about how a soft whisper in the dark can mean safety or submission, and about how in a system designed to monitor everything, the most dangerous transactions are the ones made in silence. Because not every woman in prison is looking for a lover. Some just want someone who won't hit them. Some just want a corner of the cell where they can close their eyes. So tonight, let me take you with Mira as she looks around a nameless cell, where the rules aren't written down and the question isn't, do you love her, but will you survive being there? Let me take you back to the night the lights flickered twice, and everything changed. They called her Mira Lee, short hair, dark circles under her eyes, not from staying up late, but from growing used to the unchanging light between cement walls. She arrived at Kingwell Camp one June morning. No one saw her off. No one asked why. Her crime wasn't remarkable. She was what the system labeled just dangerous enough to lock up, but not important enough to watch closely. The first thing she learned wasn't the meal schedule or roll call rules. It was who got to touch which parts of her body and when. Her cellmate was Carmen. Tall, curly-haired, with a raspy voice like someone had drained her breath with a wire before tossing her in here. Carmen didn't ask what Mira liked to eat or where she came from. She just pointed to the bottom bunk, sleep there. No whining, no questions. Don't face the wall when I change. 3 sentences, the boundary. Not a rule, just the reality of a space too small for secrets. The first week, Mira tried to follow the code. She folded her blanket, washed her clothes, stayed quiet. But on the 6th night, when a fever surged from her chest, she couldn't take it anymore. She whispered, barely audible, "Can you get me a cold cloth?" Carmen didn't answer. But 5 minutes later, a damp cloth was placed on her forehead, not gently, not kindly, just the act of someone who knew when you'd die without help. From that day, Carmen started giving Mira small things, an old hoodie, a spoonful of boiled peanuts hidden in her palm, a moment of shielding the light when Mira overslept. Mira knew in prison everything has a price. The only thing not explicitly traded was the touch after roll call. Week 3. Carmen draped an arm over Mira's stomach as they lay in bed. No permission asked. No question if it was okay. Just a heavy, steady, warm arm, something Mira hadn't felt in a long time. She didn't pull away. Not because she wanted it, but because she'd grown used to someone else controlling her body's warmth. They didn't talk about it the next morning. No one mentioned it. But that evening, Carmen handed Mira a pack of crackers. "Eat. You're weak." Voice still raspy. Hands still cold, but her eyes softened just a fraction. And so the relationship began, not with a confession, not with an embrace, but with Mira slowly no longer needing to ask what Carmen would do next. And in Kingwell Camp, that was what passed for connection, knowing someone else would touch you and not having to say stop. Mira never thought of herself as gay. But when night becomes the only thing that frees you from 4 walls and an arm that doesn't choke you, feels like a mercy. You start calling things by different names. Not love, not abuse, just survival, quiet, steady, no certificate required. In Kingwell Camp's B3 block, relationships don't have names. No one says girlfriend. No one claims wife. The language here runs on averted glances and bruises left off medical reports. After 3 weeks sharing a cell, Mira began to understand that attachment didn't need consent, It just needed time. Carmen never asked Mira to do anything. But somehow Mira started pouring her water every morning, folding her clothes after laundry hours, and sleeping closer to the wall, leaving a small gap between her back and where Carmen would lie down after 11 p.m. Once Mira tried to ask, "Was there someone before me?" Carmen didn't answer, just laughed hoarse and hollow before "Nobody comes first in here." Things started to change in the 5th week. A new inmate arrived. Young blonde hair cropped at the nape named Lexi. She was assigned to the cell next door, but a pipe leak forced her to bunk with Mira and Carmen for a week. The first night, Mira noticed Carmen shift. She was quieter. The cell's light was turned off earlier than usual, and instead of facing Mira, Carmen turned her back. Mira didn't feel jealous. Jealousy was a luxury in here. She just felt cold, literally. No hand rested on her stomach anymore. Just an old, threadbare blanket too thin to hold warmth. 3 days later, Mira saw Lexi wearing the gray hoodie, the one Carmen had lent her when she was feverish. No one said anything. But during lunch, Mira overheard a young guard whisper to another, "Carmen's got a new one already." The new girls always get picked. No one spoke up. No one intervened, because the guards knew Carmen was an unspoken pillar, keeping the cell in order, stabilizing the inmates' moods, and not starting a fight in the last 3 years. The price of that stability was a system that turned a blind eye. That evening, Mira sat alone at the last table in the dining hall. Carmen came, sat across from her, no tray in hand. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I never said you were mine. In here, it's not about picking. It's about needing someone next to you when you're too cold to sleep." Mira didn't speak. She just nodded, because she understood this wasn't a breakup, just a cell transfer, a push out of a safe zone she hadn't chosen to enter. That same night, Lexi cried softly in the dark. Mira heard it. Not out of pity, but because she'd been the first to do that with Carmen right on that same bunk when the camp's lights dimmed after the final check. The next day, Mira moved cells. No one ordered her to. She packed her things herself, left the old hoodie on the bunk. Lexi didn't look at her. Carmen didn't either. She walked out of the room like someone who'd never lived there. No record. No name in the cell assignment log. No proof anyone had ever touched anyone. In Kingwell Camp, the only thing allowed to change is who lies next to you each night. Not because of love, not because of consent, just because no one can bear this cold alone. Mira's new cell was at the end of D4 block, nicknamed the Orphanage. Not because its occupants had no family, but because they'd cycled through at least 3 cellmates and no one wanted to stay with them anymore. Her assigned cellmate was Rhea Vincent, 47, quiet, always wearing cloth gloves, even in sleep. No one knew why. Just that Rhea had been a nurse on the outside, convicted for failure to act in time. Mira didn't care about the reason. She just needed a place where she didn't belong to anyone, at least for now. The first week, they barely spoke. Rhea woke early, folded her blanket at perfect angles, read old medical books in the corner. No sharing, no smiling, no prying. It was the first peace Mira had felt since arriving. But what Mira couldn't stop noticing was the small silver box Rhea kept by her pillow. It had no lock, but no one had ever seen it opened. One night after the lights went out, Mira asked, "What's inside it?" Rhea didn't turn, but her voice answered low and steady. "The name of the only person who ever touched me without asking for anything." On the 8th day, a young guard stepped into the cell while Rhea was reading. Tall smile, 2 confident eyes lingering on Mira too long. "Vincent, someone wants to talk to you today about what happened back at the North Camp." Rhea closed her book. No reaction, but Mira saw her gloved hand tighten slightly. After the guard left, Mira hesitated. What was he talking about? Rhea looked up. There are places where if you don't choose who to lie next to, they choose for you. But in the North Camp, they didn't ask who you'd pick. They just asked how long you could last before you stopped fighting. It was the first time Mira felt sick just from hearing words, no curses, no graphic images. Just the truth, cold enough to make her scalp tighten. Rhea went back to her book. But before sleep, she added Carmen's a consequence, not a cause. Mira stopped breathing for a few seconds. You know, Carmen, I know everyone the system marked as a protector. Because before they learned to impose on others, they were the ones chosen. That night, Mira lay awake for hours. She faced the wall where a water stain traced a map-like shape. She thought back to Carmen's touches and realized they always came after something unsettled her. A scream from another cell, a scuffle in the yard, a strange look from a guard. Maybe Carmen wasn't just seeking control. Maybe she was surviving by repeating what had been done to her. That night, Mira slipped out of bed. Quietly, she opened the silver box on Rhea's table. Inside was an old scrap of paper ink smudged. I touched her hand. She didn't flinch. Just one sentence. No name. No date. Rhea didn't yell. Didn't react. Just spoke soft as wind through a wall crack. I left it unlocked. Because I wanted someone to understand sometimes affection doesn't come from choice. It comes from a reflex that no longer resists. The next morning, Mira woke up and folded her blanket neatly, just like Rhea. Not to imitate, but because for the first time she wanted to have control over something, even if it was just a corner of her bedding. It was a September morning when Mira's name appeared on the list for extra cleaning duty. No one explained. No one had to. At Kingwell, if your name was on the board, you went. She and 3 others were escorted to the basement administrative wing. A long hallway, dim lights, white walls, now yellowed like a smoker's teeth. They were each placed in a separate room called the Technical Medical Support Unit. But no one inside was sick. Only empty desks, silent cameras, and the strong smell of freshly poured disinfectant. Mira was taken into room 4. A correctional officer was already waiting inside, leaning against the desk. His name was Officer Dylan Young, tall, known for handling problem inmates without writing reports. They called it people skills. He didn't look at Mira right away. He just said, "I heard you're bunking with Rhea Vincent." Mira nodded. She once submitted a request for psychological support, but she never showed up to any sessions. She didn't know why he was telling her this until he dropped a file on the desk. Opened it. There were no papers inside. Just a grainy black and white photo taken from an old surveillance cam showing Carmen standing close to another inmate. Her hand on the other woman's neck. But her eyes stared straight into the camera. Dylan tapped the photo with his finger. "You know, someone like Carmen only has power because we allow her to." Then he looked up. This time his eyes landed directly on Mira's neck. "But sometimes one of you girls can become the substitute solution." Mira didn't react. She didn't ask substitute for what? Because she knew if you ask a question, you're negotiating. And negotiation means accepting a game where you don't get to write the rules. He didn't step closer, just stood there. And Mira, she noticed the green light on the camera behind her, pretending the system was recording. A visual insurance policy masking the fact that nothing was actually being captured anymore. When she returned to the cell, Rhea didn't ask, but she handed Mira a small saline pack wrapped in cloth. "Put it on your neck. Might bruise a little." Mira said nothing to Rhea, but her eyes were red, not from physical pain, But because she realized the only person in this prison who had ever touched her, without expecting anything in return, was Rhea. That night, Rhea told Mira about the underground game that ran the system, how the officers used certain inmates to keep order in the cells. They let the strong ones dominate so they don't have to file reports. And the ones being dominated, they pick girls who are weak, new, or have no one protecting them. Mira thought of Carmen, then Lexi, then herself. She looked down at her shoes. The stains from today, were they floor cleaner or memories being erased? Rhea ended her story with a line that stuck in Mira's throat. There are 3 types of people in here, Mira. Those who accept being the darkness, those who get swallowed by it, and those who sit still enough so no one sees their shadow shaking. That night, Mira pulled the blanket off her bed. Not because she was hot, but because for the first time she realized cold isn't always about temperature. Sometimes it's not knowing where the line is between something you chose and the role you play just to stay alive. The next morning, Mira woke up earlier than usual, not because of a nightmare and not because of the alarm, but because of a thought that had simmered all night, that maybe she hadn't been completely swallowed by the darkness, if she could still tell where it began. Rhea was sorting through a pile of old books when Mira said, "I want to know how they pick people." No surprised glance. No why. Rhea simply pulled a small, fabric-bound notebook from under her pillow. No name, no page numbers. Just a few cryptic markings on the cover, 4A, 6C, HS. These are notes I've gathered over 6 years. Not enough to expose them, but enough to figure out how to survive without bowing. Inside were names, women who had been reassigned. Not by paperwork, but by implication from the chosen, to the ones now permitted to touch. Next to each name were 3 small checkboxes, favorable rations, not called out for minor violations, signs of a soft transfer, meaning they were moved to another room under unofficial agreements with staff. Carmen was there. Lexi too. And now, Mira saw her own name written in red ink, slanted letters, M. Lee. Under observation, D. Officer. They don't issue orders, Rhea said. They offer a choice between one sharp pain and a series of slow punishments. Someone gets sleep-deprived. Someone's cleaning shift gets moved to midnight. Someone gets transferred to a room with broken cameras. Rhea closed the notebook and handed Mira a slip of paper. If you want out, someone has to see you from outside. No one in here will confirm anything. Mira had no family, no lawyer. But there was one woman she'd noticed scribbling in the exercise yard, pretending to read an older inmate named Joanna, once part of the internal documentation team. Rumor had it Joanna had a cousin who worked in the state's complaints division, but no one dared ask her outright. That afternoon, Mira approached her. No greetings. She simply placed a small folded note on the cement table. If someone no longer knows the difference between being touched out of love and being touched to buy peace, what kind of report can they write? Joanna looked at the note, then at Mira. No smile, no pity. Just a simple reply. You don't write a report. You write history, and you let it fall into the right hands when they're the most distracted. 3 nights later, Mira snuck into the medical wing. Not because she was hurt, but because she knew the cameras in that area were programmed to reset at 2:00 a.m., leaving a 12-minute gap where nothing was recorded. She turned on the internal terminal, logged in using Rhea's credentials scribbled on the back of an empty cigarette box. The interface opened Behavioral Anomaly Report form. Mira didn't enter a name. She just typed, "A female inmate is granted extra time exempted from body checks and allowed to switch cellmates upon request." 3 changes in 9 months. No formal paperwork, no medical basis, no infractions. She didn't send it. She saved it to a temporary folder named Laundry Budget, because if she sent it, the system would tag her IP. She needed someone else to open it and find it by accident. The next morning, Mira was back mopping floors with other inmates. One of them was Lisa, a new girl from the room next door. As Mira handed her the rag, she leaned in close. "Be careful if Carmen starts offering you cookies." Lisa looked up a little confused. Why Mira didn't answer. She just smiled, not warmly, not coldly, but like someone who had just pulled their hand away from a wound and realized the bleeding had slowed. If only a little. That night, Mira returned to her cell, folded her blanket. Ria was asleep. On Ria's bed, there was a handwritten note, "I see you." And for the first time in years, I believe silence isn't the only way to survive. There was one thing Mira didn't know. At Kingwell, the system doesn't strike back with force. It strikes back with blurred lines. On Wednesday morning, Mira was summoned to HR. No warning, no reason given. There was a file on the desk, no name on the cover. Across from her sat a young female officer recently transferred from the West Division. Her eyes weren't cruel. Not kind either. Just empty. "You used to room with Vincent Ria," Mira nodded. "Did you observe any manipulative behavior, any intimidation recruitment, any aggression toward staff?" Mira wanted to say no, but she remembered Ria's words. In this system, truth spoken too loudly gets its mic cut. So Mira simply replied, she read books and gave her food away if someone else was hungry. The officer tapped her pen lightly against the file. "And what about the note you hid in the medical system?" Mira froze. No one should have known about that. No one had been there. "You thought you were clever, slipping a paragraph into the laundry budget folder, didn't you?" A chill crept down Mira's spine. "Don't worry. I'm not saying this to punish you. I just want you to understand everything is monitored, even silence, if it's intentional." She closed the file. Mira had once worked admin at a small insurance firm. She'd been convicted of unclear financial transfers. Really, she'd been trying to help her sister, who was in deep debt. She hadn't meant harm, but none of that mattered once she stepped inside the prison. "Starting next week, you'll be moved to D6, less risk of conflict there." D6, everyone knew it as the slow filter unit where whistleblowers were sent, kept away from influence, cut off from echo. And so once again, Mira was relocated. Not for causing trouble, not for breaking rules, but for daring to remember something the system had designed her to forget. When Mira was packing her things, Ria said nothing, but she placed something into Mira's hand. An old button drilled but not sewn. The back had been shaved smooth with a fine engraving, "Still awake." Her first night in D6, Mira was assigned to share a room with someone named Carla. Short, raspy voice, tattoos. Used to be part of Carmen's crew, the ones who collected leftovers. Carla didn't say a word for the first 4 hours. But when Mira went to wash her face, Carla spoke up from behind her. "Heard you like to write." That true Mira wiped her face. Gave a small nod. "Heard you're trying to find out who allows people like Carmen to do what they do." Carla stepped closer, voice lower. "I can show you, but you'll have to remember it. Not on paper, but in the way you let it burn into your chest every time you look in the mirror." 3 days later, Mira received a laundry bag. Tucked inside was a small piece of paper, Room 2B, Officer Davis, camera inactive from 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. every Thursday. She didn't know who sent it. But that Thursday night, she stood at a distance. She didn't intervene. A young inmate was called into Davis's room. No escort, no logged reason. 3 hours later, she was returned, eyes red, collar wrinkled, no explanation given. The next morning, Mira left a note inside the food distribution basket taped beneath a reused tray. The system isn't silent because it sees nothing. It's silent because someone preset the mode to erase. I saw it. No name. No date. Just a whisper embedded beneath the system's coding for those who know how to stare at the ceiling and when to lower their heads. That night, Mira received an old piece of bread from Joanna. Inside, wrapped in thin foil, was a note. "Welcome to the system beneath the system. We read everything, even when we don't reply." The door to room 3 in D6 closed behind Mira with a metallic sound that needed no force because by now everything that collapsed had been programmed not to make noise. Carla wasn't in the room that night. Just an empty bed, a faint yellow light dripping from the vent, and a strip of tape stuck beneath the bed frame. Mira peeled it off. Inside was a note folded 8 times, handwritten. "The one helping you will disappear if you speak the truth. The one harming you will be promoted if you stay silent. No name. No instructions. Just a question in disguise wearing the mask of a threat." She thought she was ready to stand on the side of light. But here the light usually came from the interrogation room ceiling, not the morning sun. The next night, while hauling laundry from storage, Mira was approached quietly by Lisa, the young girl she once warned about Carmen's cookies. Lisa leaned in. "Lexi's been transferred. No notice. No paperwork. Carmen's still here." Mira froze. Lisa continued, "And I heard Carmen was given the role of conflict mediator. Means they've officially named what she's been doing unofficially all along." Something shifted inside Mira, not like anger, but a cold hollowness only systems can leave behind. You lose all trust, but can't say when exactly it slipped away. That night, Mira wrote in her small notebook. Not names, not cells, not plans. She simply wrote, "Carmen isn't a monster. She's a terminal node installed to digest what the system doesn't want to touch." Ria had once said, "Don't forget the first reason you started writing." And now Mira understood, you don't write to fight. You write so you won't be swallowed whole. The next morning, Mira was summoned to records. Joanna was already there. She didn't smile, but her tone was soft. "There's a blank account in the internal system. No assigned user, no profile, but it has clearance to view transfer requests." She slid a login across the desk, NO3 Lena. No one knows who created it, but it was accessed 3 times this month. The last time was for Lexi's transfer. Mira asked, "Where can I log in from?" Joanna replied, "Only from one machine, the one in the old psych eval room. People only go there if they show signs of instability." Mira stood up, didn't say thank you. Because in this place, gratitude was a luxury. All that mattered was placing the right action in the right place. 3 days later, Mira skipped breakfast, skipped yard time. She stayed in the corner of her room, scratching faint lines into her wrist with her nail, just enough to be flagged for behavioral disturbance. And as expected, at 10:07 a.m., the intercom called Mira Lee, psych assessment, room 09, the old room dusty with peeling leather chairs, but the computer still glowed. No guards. She typed in the login, No3 Lena. The file's unlocked. The first line read, "Carmen, granted self-authority to request cellmate changes. Approved by Davis D. Lexi, transferred to another facility. Request origin internal, approval anonymous. Vincent Ria. Denied access to inmates with history of filing complaints. Status potential behavior contagion." Mira hit print. The paper rolled out of the old printer, still smelling faintly of damp. She didn't take it back to her room. She folded it and taped it beneath the armrest of the peeling leather chair, the same one where she once noticed a faded carving. When no one believes you, let the chair remember. That night, Mira spoke to no one. She simply returned to her room, folded her blanket, stacked her books. And on the last page of her notebook, she wrote, "Sometimes you don't need to scream to break the silence. You just have to stand up inside a system designed to keep you kneeling." 2 days later, just as Mira entered the dining hall, a correctional officer approached her. There was no summons, no administrative form, just a light hand placed on her shoulder and a single line, "Someone's requested you be moved to Block A, urgently." Block A, the section reserved for high-stability inmates, often those with semi-official roles in maintaining order. Carmen had once been there, and that was also where Lexi had disappeared. As she left, Mira discreetly tucked her notebook beneath her pillow. Not out of fear of losing it, but because she knew if she didn't come back, someone would find it. She was led into cell A2, where the air didn't reek of mildew like D6. The ceilings were higher, the walls freshly painted. There was even a ceiling fan. Her new roommate's name was Maya. Tall, thin, sharp-eyed, former head of the prison library group. She greeted Mira with a sentence as cold as steel: "I know who you are, and I know you're being watched." That night, Maya didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I once recorded the names of 3 officers involved in misconduct. Gave it to my lawyer. What happened? They transferred me here, far from everyone I knew, far from the resistance network, and close to the tongue that's been slicing lines of code from the system." Mira asked. "So why didn't you stop?" Maya let out a dry laugh. "Because if I stop writing, we're no longer storytellers. We're just what's left over." 3 nights later, at 3:18 a.m., Mira was woken up. No sirens, no alarms, just a figure standing at her cell door. "Officer Davis." "Ms. Lee, come with me." No escort, no lit cameras. They walked down a side corridor Mira had never been allowed to access, down basement stairs, to the last room. When the door opened, there was no interrogation table, just an old TV and a video playing silent black and white. Mira saw herself, typing in "No 3 Lena," printing a document, folding the paper. Davis stood beside her, not threatening, just watching like someone examining a dull knife. "I don't care what you found. I just want to know, what do you plan to do with it?" Mira didn't answer immediately. She looked at the screen, at herself, remembering, breathing. "I plan to survive. But not by letting someone else decide who I sleep next, to who I bow, to who I pretend not to see." Davis nodded. Slow, heavy, almost regretful. Wrong answer. He pressed a button. The video went dark. The next morning, Mira was reassigned to a new bunk. No reason given. But she knew this was the final warning before her file got sanitized. She returned to D6, but Ria was gone. Only Lisa remained sitting quietly, reading a small notebook Mira had left behind. Lisa looked up and whispered, "They took her right after you got moved to a block." No one said where. Mira gripped the bed frame, and for the first time since arriving at Kingwell, her hands trembled with rage. Lisa silently handed her a small, rolled-up slip of paper shaped like a candy. Inside, written in a familiar slanted script, "If I disappear, don't look for me. Let my name appear again in what you write. Ria." That night, Mira unfolded the old hand-drawn map Joanna had given her. She spotted a narrow hallway unlabeled connecting the old medical wing to the data archive room. She knew that's where automatic backups were stored. Records the system believed deleted, but which were merely hidden from those who didn't know where to look. At 2:43 a.m., Mira slipped out. Lisa kept watch. She crept through the auxiliary hallway. In her hand, the button Ria once gave her, engraved with "Still Awake." Just as she placed her hand on the archive door, Mira paused. Not from fear, but because for the first time, She realized she wasn't walking to survive anymore. She was walking to reclaim names for those who had been erased. The hallway leading to the data vault had no cameras. Not because someone forgot to install them, but because the corridor was never designed to officially exist. Rough concrete walls, the sharp smell of damp, and the echo of Mira's footsteps, the only sound that moved with her through the dark. She entered the access code Joanna had given her, 3 digits, a birth date no longer stored in any record, 11/06/43. The door clicked open. No alarm. Inside was a small, cold room with a single old computer sitting atop a metal desk. Mira took a deep breath, then began typing. She navigated to Restore Archive, a section normally restricted to system-level personnel. But through the login, NO3 Lena, a temporary branch, opened. It wasn't data, it was the system's cached memory from the final 72 hours before a person's file was erased. She searched for Vincent Ria. Nothing. Just one encrypted item, no title, no category, but its size matched the footprint of a full inmate profile. Mira opened it. Inside a short audio clip, Ria answering an internal survey, her voice calm, "I've never left my cell without knowing if I'd return." A scanned handwritten note, "I know what they're doing is systematic." And finally, a photo of the button engraved with "Still Awake" shot from above like evidence. Mira understood someone, maybe Davis, had been collecting the pieces for destruction. But for whatever reason, he hadn't erased them. Not yet. She backed up the files onto a tiny USB smaller than a fingernail, just enough to slide into the sole of her left shoe. It couldn't connect to the outside, but it could preserve everything in internal memory. She removed the drive, wiped all access logs, and stood to leave. As she exited, she stopped. On the wall, drawn in smudged charcoal, was the image of a hand rising out of water. Not waving, just lifted, as if declaring, "I'm not gone yet." Mira quietly dragged her finger across the scab on her wrist and marked a small red dot in the palm of the drawn hand. No one would know who had done it. But if someone walked in after her, they would understand the last person here didn't sink. They sent a signal. When Mira returned to her cell, the sky was still dark. Lisa was still keeping watch. Mira gave her a slight nod. Lisa understood. What needed to be saved had been saved. The next day, the entire prison was hit with a random inspection. Personal items were searched. Files were audited. 3 inmates were taken, 2 for insufficient grounds to remain, and 1 for suspicious behavior in auxiliary zones. Lisa looked at Mira, eyes wide with worry. Mira said softly, "It's not because someone got caught. It's because they've started to realize who remembers too much." That evening, Mira wrote a final line in her new notebook. "Her name hasn't been read aloud outside these walls, but I've restored it. And even if no one thanks me, I believe one thing: the erased don't need justice. They just need someone to say, 'I remember your name.'" Inside a crust of bread that night, Joanna left Mira a note, tiny, wrapped in soft foil. A lawyer just entered the facility. Reason: internal audit of cell blocks with unusually high transfer rates. You might leave something in the mail bin. Not to send, but so someone might finally notice. On the final night of the week, Mira sat beneath the dim light. She pulled the USB from the heel of her shoe, wrapped it in the printed slip, bearing the recipient's State Department of Corrections. Internal Transfer Reversal Investigation. She didn't know who it would reach, didn't know if it would be tossed aside, but there was one thing she knew better than anyone: silence might save your life. But only restored memory can save what made your life worth living. On the 3rd day after Mira secretly placed the USB in the internal mail bin, nothing happened. No officers called her in for questioning, no warnings, no room transfers. That silence was the first signal. That morning, Lisa didn't show up for her usual kitchen duty. Mira asked another girl from their unit, "Where's Lisa?" The answer came from someone who spoke barely above a whisper. "She fell down the stairs. Her left eye won't open. They're keeping her in the infirmary. No visits allowed." Fell, the staircase in D6 had only 2 steps. And Lisa was the slowest walker, always holding the railing like a reflex. Mira understood immediately. Lisa hadn't been punished. She'd been warned. That night, a slip of paper was pushed through the crack under Mira's cell door. No sender. Just one line, "Stop remembering out loud." She sat in the dark. Didn't write. Didn't cry. She just sat back against the wall, eyes fixed on the nameless space between the 2 beds where Ria once sat folding her blanket. Mira didn't feel afraid. She felt hollow, because now anyone connected to her carried the risk of vanishing after a meal, a routine checkup, or even a cough that lasted too long in the night. Joanna was next. By the 5th day, she stopped coming to the archive room. Someone from the sewing unit whispered to Mira. They say she was transferred up Block A, but the system lists her as in isolation pending a psych evaluation. The isolation wing has no mail, no phone calls, no complaints ever read, only silence politely referred to in administrative language as behavioral adjustment time. Mira wrote a line in her new notebook. "I'm not afraid of being taken into the dark. I'm afraid of becoming the reason someone else's light gets extinguished." She stopped talking at meals. No notes, no glances. But each night before sleep, she'd press one word into the wall with her fingertip, tiny, almost invisible, "Save." Not for someone to read, but so she herself would know memory still existed here. A week later, during a fitness check, she saw Carmen, thinner, dark circles under her eyes, but still smiling just the same. As Carmen walked by, she whispered, "I used to be their hand. Now they've found a new one. Careful you're not the target anymore. You're the mirror. And everyone sees themselves when they look at you." Mira didn't respond, just looked into Carmen's eyes, and for the first time she saw exhaustion behind the familiar smile. Maybe Carmen never fought back because she never believed anyone could survive it. Maybe she once was Mira years ago. That night, a roll appeared in Mira's food tray. No sender, no note, just a small strip of cloth tied like a toddler's waistband, and a faint red mark written along its edge. "Her name is still here. If you disappear, I'll be next." No signature, no one to claim responsibility. But Mira knew the system could kill voices, but not repetition. And if every person wrote just one piece, the system would run out of hands before it could erase them all. That night, Mira woke up suddenly heart-pounding. Not because of a nightmare, but because the last thought before sleep was, "Maybe I should stop." Then she sat up, turned on the light, and wrote on the inside cover of her notebook, "I'm not stronger than them. I'm just the last one still writing after everyone else has been forced to stop." At Kingwell, open resistance is usually crushed before it ever fully forms. But quiet resistance, if patient, if persistent, can grow roots in places no one expects, inside a loaf of bread, beneath a chair, or between the blank pages of a notebook. The following week, Mira left no new messages, but she began to shift her daily rhythm. No more eating at the usual time. No more sitting at familiar tables. No more appearing beside the same person twice a day. She became blurred, harder to pin down. Not out of fear, but preparation. Mira sought out Maya again, her former cellmate from Block A, during roll call while everyone's heads were bowed, reciting inmate numbers. Mira leaned in and whispered, "I'm not writing notes anymore. but I'm collecting. Maya didn't turn her head, but her voice came steady. Collecting what traces? Who's been reassigned 3 times in 2 months? Who's allowed bathroom access after hours? Who gets special meds without any medical record? That night in the corner of D6, Mira opened a new notebook, but didn't write any words. She drew. Each person became a symbol, triangle, circle, square. Each strange action a marked line. Slowly, a star-shaped map began to form, and at the center was Davis. The one who never got his hands dirty, but was always present right before or right after someone got reassigned. Lisa, still under surveillance, found her own way to help. Each morning, she pinned a different hair clip onto her shirt, 3 colors. Blue, no surveillance. Yellow, ACO is watching. Red, do not approach. Without speaking a word, Lisa and Mira created a silent signaling system based on color and eye contact. Not to hide, but to reprogram the prison's logic from the inside out. One night, Joanna returned. Not in person, but in a tattered library book. The final page held her handwriting, "I haven't disappeared. I'm just in a place where hiding is no longer necessary. If you're still writing, then I still exist." Days later, an inmate named Davina, once forced to act as an internal coordinator under Davis's orders, asked to speak with Mira. "I used to get special treatment for doing what they asked. But I was also reassigned without warning the one time I said no. I've kept a notebook. If you can use it, I'll give it to you." Mira nodded. "I don't need proof to accuse. I need data to restore. For those who once lived here, who once had names but are no longer spoken." They began building a shared record, handwritten. No names, no signatures, but each person held a part. Every week they passed pieces through laundry loads tucked into cigarette packs, bread wrappers, tea bags. They called it the Echo Ledger. Because in this prison, truth doesn't need to be shouted. It just needs enough echoes not to disappear. On the last night of the month, Mira sat alone on her bunk. She didn't write. She just looked at the old button engraved with "Still Awake," and she etched one more word beside it and watching. Because now she wasn't just the recorder. She was the observer, and the system was being forced to watch back. On Monday morning, the list of candidates for special clemency review was posted on the internal board. Only 2 names. One of them was Lee Mira. She stared at the paper, as if through frosted glass. The letters were clear, but their meaning distorted by everything she had endured. Someone like her, no lawyer, no sponsor, not enough time served, suddenly up for early release. A woman nearby whispered, "Lucky you. Maybe someone outside finally opened a door for you." Mira said nothing, because she understood when the system opens the door on its own, it's not an act of mercy. It's how it expels a threat under the mask of humanity. That night, Lisa slipped a small note through the crack beneath Mira's door. Joanna was once up for early release. 3 days later, her file vanished from the system. No name, no inmate number, no record saying "released," just gone. The question was no longer, are they rewarding me, but are they erasing me this time? With a polite handshake, Mira met with Maya one final time while the chapel was empty. Neither of them knelt. They simply sat on the back bench, 2 silhouettes learning how to lean into each other's outline. Maya asked quietly, "If it's real, if you're really being released, will you go?" Mira was silent for a long time. Then she whispered, "I'm not afraid of being forgotten. I'm afraid of walking out without leaving something behind for others to remember." She had once thought survival was the victory, but now she understood to live is a gift, but to be remembered is a right. The night before her release review, Mira wrote a reverse report. No signature. no submission to the guards. She tucked it into the echo ledger right at the center between the pages that bore the names Ria and Lexi. The report accused no one. It simply listed names of those transferred under unusual circumstances, the moments they vanished, who held the authority to sign their relocation orders, and one final column who still remembers. The first name on that list was Carmen. The last was Mira herself. The next morning, when the transport van arrived, Mira didn't step out right away. Instead, she handed Lisa a small strip of cloth, the one Ria had once given her. "If I don't come back, don't cry, just keep writing. Even if it's one sentence. Even if no one reads it yet." Lisa gripped her hand tightly. "I don't know how to start," Mira whispered. "Write my name. Once. And sign it with your own." She walked out of Kingwell not like someone stepping through a gate, but like someone stepping out of a locked dream. No cheering, no press. Just a cold, gray sky and the sound of the prison gate closing behind her. But Mira knew this time she wasn't walking out alone. In every step, there was Lexi. There was Ria. There was Joanna. And all those whose names no longer appeared on the roll call. She carried them with her, not just in memory, but in the names now written down in the one place no one could reach, the echo ledger. Mira stepped down from the white van marked Internal Transfer. Authorized. There were no sirens, no handcuffs, no farewell. Just a hazy stretch of sky, and a man in a gray suit waiting beneath a concrete awning. "Ms. Lee," he greeted, his voice so neutral it betrayed no intention. "We're the unit assigned to oversee reintegration, not freedom, not return to society, just oversight." Where she was taken wasn't a home. It wasn't even a halfway house. It was a room with 2 locked doors, no nameplate, in an empty building where every sound echoed like an interrogation. Each meal was delivered to her door, no one ever looked her in the eye. And every night Mira recorded what she remembered, not on paper this time, but onto the wooden table with her fingernail beneath a thin coat of paint. The first name, Ria Vincent. The second, Joanna M. A week passed. No one came. In the second week, a letter slipped through the door. No envelope, just a folded sheet of paper. "Inside, your name has been removed from the transfer system, but the echo ledger still exists. We've passed copies to 3 new hands, and Lisa has written her first sentence. The final line read, 'We haven't won.' But now it takes them longer to erase us because there are more names." Mira read the note 3 times, then folded it carefully and slid it into the crack behind her bed. A place where the wind whistled each evening as if to remind her that freedom is a kind of weather, sometimes quiet, sometimes gone. On day 17, Mira was summoned for an interview. A cold room, a polished steel table. The same man from her arrival sat across from her. "We see you haven't applied for a job," he said. "No contact with family. How do you plan to support yourself?" Mira looked up. "I don't live off work. I live off not being forgotten." He tilted his head, no argument, no approval. "What are you writing?" She smiled. "Barely. I'm backing up memory on something the system can't control, which is my body, my voice, and the others who are still remembering." On her way back, Mira passed a blank wall. She paused, reached into her pocket, and pulled out a sharpened false nail, the only thing she managed to smuggle from the prison. She carved a line. Just 3 words we still hear. No one saw. No camera. But Mira knew something had just been recorded. Not in data, but in the pulse of a system that once believed it could never echo. That night, Mira slept without writing a single thing. She didn't need to, because somewhere inside that prison Lisa was writing. And in a nameless cell, a new inmate had just found a scrap of fabric stitched with the words, Write one name. Begin. On the second Monday of the fourth week, a minor incident occurred. Within the state's inmate management system, a software designed to run silently accessible only to executive-level personnel, a brief error message appeared. Data reappeared. Code VX 1975. Name R. Vincent. Status unknown. The message was visible for only 3 minutes before it was removed. But someone saw it. A technician in the backup data department working the night shift captured a screenshot out of habit, the kind of self-protective reflex one develops in places where things shouldn't appear. He didn't know who Rhea Vincent was. He only found it strange the reappeared error only ever occurred when a profile that had been permanently deleted reinitiated itself. That morning, inside the post-release surveillance center, Mira was summoned to verify identity related to overlapping encryption records. She sat before a screen displaying a list of anonymized entries identified only by code. One of them ended with VX 1975. Mira gently tapped a key. The system didn't open the data. Instead, it showed a single question. Do you still remember this name? She didn't select yes. She didn't select no. She simply pressed ESC escape because she understood the system wasn't looking for an answer. It was testing her. That evening, Mira walked around the semi-supervised living compound, where every footstep was tracked by a wrist-based GPS and every sentence recorded under the guise of recidivism risk analysis. She wandered to the abandoned library. One shelf was marked Internal Archives, not for circulation. Quietly, she opened the bottom drawer. Beneath an old statistical report, she found a handwritten note. I told them I hadn't disappeared. I was just waiting. And so they stopped looking. Camper van. No one signed the note. There was no way to verify its source. No camera captured the moment Mira discovered it. But to her it was final proof that a deleted name could return if someone remembered to rewrite it. The next morning, Mira declined to complete her post-custodial cognitive assessment. Instead, she requested a meeting with a representative from the Internal Investigations Office. Not to accuse, not to appeal her surveillance, only to ask a single question. If a name once deleted from the system were to appear again, what would you do? The man across the table didn't answer immediately. Instead, he asked, "Who told you about that?" Mira smiled, not warmly, but just enough to reflect the very fear they were trying to bury. No one told me. I just didn't forget. That afternoon, when she returned to her room, a new slip of paper had been slid under the door. No signature, no greeting. Just a single typed line. It wasn't an error. It was memory the system couldn't erase. Mira sat down, took a pen, and wrote on the wall, once blank, "If a name returns, it means it never truly left." And below that, in bold strokes, for the first time, she wrote Rhea Vincent, not as a farewell, but as a summoning. On the final morning of her semi-supervised residency, Mira woke earlier than usual. Not because of the overhead speaker, not for a scheduled meeting, but because in her dream someone had called her name, and then called another. Mira, then Rhea. She made tea using water gone cold from the night before. Each sip felt like rinsing her memory clean. Nothing was new, but the old things were beginning to taste sharper. By midday, she received an unmarked brown envelope. Inside was a printed order from the state's Inmate Coordination Office. One section, redacted faintly in marker, read, Rhea Vincent, MIA, status unknown, not deceased. Last recorded interaction, Mira Lee. No one summoned her for questioning. No one ordered her surveillance adjusted. But suddenly, she was no longer subject to routine checks. Several previously locked files reopened without explanation, as if the system, after all its deletions and manipulations, had finally grown tired of scrubbing away a name that had already begun to take root in the language beneath their control. That afternoon, she walked to the archive section of the library once more. Everything was as it had been. But at the end of the shelf, there was a new notebook, hardbound, the pages still smelling of ink. The first page read, Echo Ledger, Volume 2. No author. No indication of who had begun it. But Mira knew it wasn't a copy. It was a continuation. That night, back in her room, she lit a small candle, one of the few ever officially allowed. She didn't pray. She simply wrote on paper for the first time in months a complete list of the names she had once heard, once gathered, once held with trembling hands. Rhea Vincent 2, Lexi Moore 3, Joanna M 4, Lisa G 5, Carmen W 6, Davina S 7, Maya L 8, Mira Lee. It wasn't a list of victims. It wasn't a protest record. It was evidence that they had lived and had never been forgotten. She placed the paper at the bottom of her suitcase. The next morning, she was notified. Your supervision period has ended. You are free to leave the facility. No farewell. No signatures required. Just a door opening this time, truly. She stepped out. The wind hit her face, light cold and filled with empty space. She didn't look back. But as she passed through the gate, she felt something in her coat pocket. She reached in. It was a scrap of cloth, faded. Only 2 words remained, trembling like breath, begin again. And she understood. The story didn't end here. It was simply restarting through the hand of whoever came next, ready to write, ready to remember, ready to carve back the names once erased. She didn't leave a message on the wall. She didn't turn back to look at the gate that had just closed. She simply placed one finger on the edge of her suitcase where the paper with 8 names now rested. As if by touching it, she could keep something alive, something still breathing. Because Mira knew the ending isn't when the gate opens. The ending is when no one remembers the gate was ever there. In systems built to punish truth, often falls behind what they call procedure. But sometimes it's the smallest scratches that memory seeps into and stays. We like to think systems are unshakable, but no software can defend against this. One person remembers, then 2, then 3, and soon no one is willing to pretend they forgot. If you've ever passed a blacked-out name in a file, if you've ever seen a report that never reached the right ears, remember the story never disappears. It's just waiting for someone brave enough to write it back. What would you do if you were the last one who remembered a name that had been erased? Share your thoughts below, because every comment might be an act of restoration. And if you believe in the power of telling the truth, follow this channel, so you don't miss the things others would rather you forget. A name erased is a life concealed, but the one who writes it back reopens an entire world.